Hey everybody, how are you doing this morning? The test wasn't so bad, was it? I surprised you with it, yes. Okay, we're getting ready to start Unit 4. And the first chapter of Unit 4 is social psychology. And I think it's particularly interesting right now as we all sort of hunker down in our homes and listen to the experts and see how we're going to respond to that. Social psychology is how society impacts the individual to behave differently than we would if society wasn't applying pressure to us. We'll talk quite a bit in this chapter about authority, about obedience, and about conformity. Now, you know from things I've said before that I'm not real big on authority. I work better by myself. I don't like somebody putting a whole lot of restrictions on me. But you know what? Right now, I'm obeying authority. I'm following everything Dr. Fauci says just like it is the gospel. And I will continue to do that until I feel it's safe for you and for me to be outside and among other people. Governor Cuomo's not too bad to listen to either, to tell you the truth. They seem to both have captured that authority that people give to them, and so we follow their direction because we feel it's in our best interest. But why is it that we act differently when we are with other people? You know we do. I'm with you this morning, and I put on makeup and tried to control my hair. You should see me the rest of the time. It's not pretty. Just ask Professor Bob. Okay, so it's, we have these social rules, we have these social guidelines, we have things we do, but why do we play the blame game? Why do we have to point a finger? Why does there have to be someone that's to blame? And frequently it's the victim. Why do we have prejudices? Doesn't that seem, when you just look at it philosophically, to be kind of bizarre that we discriminate and have prejudices against other human beings? We're gonna scratch the surface of why in this chapter. It goes much deeper than what we can touch on. There's whole courses in social psychology. I wish I got to teach it as a class. But we are going to take a glimpse into the conditioning and the consequences that change who we are. Now, if you haven't received your PowerPoints yet, be sure and email me and let me know. All right, so you should have your PowerPoints for this unit. You should have your grades from your exam. All right, I'm going to sign out now and jump on that PowerPoint and tell you everything you need to know. All right, be safe. Well, here we go, slide number 1. And we're going to go into the chapter that is my favorite, I think. I would truly just love to have a whole semester of social psychology. And of course, there's a couple of other classes I would like that way too. Let's look together at the definition for this. The study of how social roles, attitudes, relationships, and groups influence us to do what we would not necessarily do on our own. And cultural psychology is the origin of these roles and attitudes and group norms that are based off of our ethnic, regional, and national communities. Well, this sounds pretty broad, doesn't it? In other words, you mean everything that's out there has an influence on little old me. Yep, that's exactly what we're going to see in this chapter. Roles and rules are important to remember. Roles and rules. Norms are how we are supposed to act in society. And it seems as though every role we have has norms for that role. Think about dating. There's unspoken rules that go with dating, and if we get into a relationship with someone who has a different set of rules than we do, a different set of norms than we do, it's real awkward. Sometimes we don't even, keep the relationship going. But really, in a pairing, you've got two people here, okay, they've decided to be in a relationship. Who's the decision maker? If it's a big thing, do you just fight over it indefinitely, or is one person more or less the decision maker? And how do you behave in public? Some people are real happy showing a lot of physical affection in public, and other people would just rather take a beating than to have public displays of affection. And who pays? Do you take turns paying? Does he always pay? That doesn't seem fair. Does she pay sometimes, but he doesn't know when? See, there's norms. There's how you're supposed to act. In a parenting role, there's norms for how you're supposed to act as a parent. How are the kids supposed to act? And this can get into cultural situations. I have a number of friends who are from the Middle East, and it seems to me, and I'm probably wrong, that little boys have much more freedom in their behavior. I mean, basically, they can just run around and do whatever it is they want to do, and little girls have a much more strict code of behavior. They just don't get by with near as much as their brothers do. I could be wrong about that. That's just from an outsider's view of it. But when do we reinforce our kids? When do we punish our kids? How much education do we pay for? How long are they allowed to live in the basement? All of these kinds of things have norms within our society and within our particular social groups. So we're going to take a look at these norms and these roles. Gosh, we all have roles. I have a role as a teacher. I have a role as a wife. I have a role as a mom of grown kids. I have a role as a nanny. I have a role in social issues. And each of those situations has different sets of rules that go with it. In this chapter, what we're going to look at is obedience and authority. We're going to look at prejudice. We're going to look at conformity, all kinds of things that make us kind of wince when we think about it. And it's going to be interesting to see how you react to it. I'm really sorry we're not meeting in class because I'd love to have question and answer during this chapter. Let's first of all take a look at obedience, because we are obedient to these norms and roles that we have most of the time. Otherwise, we get punished by society. So we do have a tendency to obey. Back in the 1950s, there was a research project done on obedience. Now, you have to have a little bit of a historic background here. Stop and think about it. The early 1950s, we as a world had just finished World War II, and the world was horrified by the things that the Nazis did. And every country and every single group of people, including our country, said, we could never do that. That excuse of, I was just taking orders, that won't fly with us. We're Americans. We wouldn't do that. So these experiments they ran really pushed a lot of buttons for people. And what they did, you can see from the slide here, slide number 3, they had this console with toggle switches on it and some gauges and everything. And it supposedly was hooked up to electrical wiring to deliver shocks to someone in the next room. So they had someone who thought that they were going to play the teacher, but actually, he wasn't the teacher. He was the subject of the experiment. And it was supposed to be the learner in the other room. And the learner was hooked up to these electrical wires. And they even showed the subject of the matter, who was the teacher, that it did present a shock, although the other guy wasn't hooked up to it. So the rules went like this. Every time the person that's the learner answers incorrectly or doesn't ask, you give them a shock. And the next time you give them a stronger shock. And the next time a stronger shock. Until you get, up toward the end and it's like danger, danger may cause sudden death. Okay? The experimenters on this, I bet they had bets on this. Most of them thought that most people would not do this. Or maybe they would deliver one little shock, but they wouldn't go ahead, be obedient to the person who appeared to be in authority. Well, a whole lot of different things happened than what they thought would happen. Every subject gave at least one shock, and 2/3 of them gave all the shocks. True, some of them were sweating, some of them were shaking, some of them were asking to please let out of the experiment. But part of the experiment was not only to see how obedient they would be, but what their relationship with authority was. And they found out some interesting things about this. But remember, this is the 50s. We had just finished a war with all of the Holocaust and all of that horror, and yet 2/3 of all of the Americans who participated in this study delivered all of the shocks to the people that were supposed to be the learner. And there were situations tied to this similar to the people that were the learner crying out, help me, no, please don't do that, please, no, that hurts, I'm having a heart attack, blah, 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 blah. And the authority would come in with this little clipboard and his white jacket and his stethoscope and say, now, you must continue because you signed up to do this and you'll ruin my experiment if you don't. And they were like, okay, get you again. Even when people stopped responding entirely, as though they had fainted or had a heart attack or died, people playing the teacher were still instructed to deliver all the shocks. That's pretty horrific if you ask me. So they did this study a number of times to see what would happen. And what they learned is nothing that the victim said or did decreased compliance with authority. That's terrifying. Nothing that the victim said, help me, no, help me, no. Nope, gonna go ahead and comply with authority. They did find some reasons where people were more likely to disobey. When the experimenter left the room, people were more likely to listen to their own conscience and be disobedient. If the victim was in the room with the subjects, the teachers, and the teachers were supposed to administer a shock directly to the victim's body and they could see the victim, they were less likely to deliver the shock. If two experimenters or two people in authority issued conflicting demands. So I say you must continue, and Dr. Meany says, no, you must let her stop if she wants to. Okay, those would be conflicting demands. If an ordinary man, not an authority figure, waltzed in and said, oh, Dr. Smith says you should continue, you were less likely to continue than if Dr. Smith himself had come in and said, you should continue. So if the clerk comes in and says, oh, go ahead with the experiment, don't wait for Dr. Smith, maybe you would ignore him. And it would be interesting to me, and I know they won't reproduce these studies now, but I'll bet at the time, if the doctor or the authority or the experimenter was a female, I'll bet females had less authority than men do, because in the 50s, we didn't have female attorneys. There were very few female doctors. You almost never saw a female judge. Women really were not in those upper echelon kinds of positions, and certainly not in science. Number E on this slide, if the subject worked with peers who refused to continue. Okay, so everybody who's playing the teacher, and you've got several teachers there, and they band together and they say, all right, I'm not doing this. This is evil and bad and awful, and we are going to stop. It really helps people if they have someone else that they can pull into their side of the argument and not continue. So the conclusion of Milgram's obedience study: obedience is a function of the situation, not of your personality. You may be the most kind, loving, thoughtful, you wouldn't hurt a fly, you catch spiders and put them outside. But if you were in a situation like Milgram put people in, your personality would not take control. The situation and your feeling about authority would take control. The nature of the relationship to authority influences obedience. If you respect authority, you are much more likely to obey than if you say, you say you're in authority, but I don't care. So what happens when you say no? Our society isn't set up for us to say no to authority. We're just supposed to more or less blindly go ahead. When we say no, there are negative consequences that are put out there to bring us back into line. If I say, no, I'm not going to pay attention to the speed limits. No, I'm not going to listen to the building codes when I have my house put up. No, I'm not going to have the electrical company come out and okay the new electrical wiring in my house. No, I'm not going to take my car and have it licensed. You know, there are consequences to those things. We have written laws to basically keep us in line. And laws are good. Laws aren't bad. Okay, we need a structure for society, but I just think we need to pay attention and know why we should perhaps be revolting and when we shouldn't. there's a study called the Stanford Prison Study, and there really isn't a Stanford prison. What there is a Stanford University in California, and it's a very prestigious school. And a man by the name of Zimbardo, Philip Zimbardo, you may have seen him in film clips that you've seen in high school. He always reminds me of what Eddie Munster from the Munsters, an old black and white TV, what Eddie Munster would have looked like had he grown up. But anyway, you can find this and the Milgram study both on YouTube. He wanted to see how important roles were. And so they got some volunteer students who said, yeah, we'll take a couple of weeks out of our life to help out the sociology department and be part of an experiment. And so these college students were randomly picked out of the bigger group, randomly assigned to the role of either prisoners or guards. And the basement in one of the buildings at Stanford University was turned into a faux prison, so to speak. So they didn't give these people any other instructions. They just were given their title. You're a prisoner, you're a guard, here you go, get into the room. So what happened? Well, the people playing prisoners became very upset and rebellious and angry and wanted this over with and let me out, I didn't do anything. They begged to be released. You would have thought they were in real prison, not a 2-week experiment. Some of them just had a meltdown, so to speak. And the guards were even, I think, more interesting. A third of the guards became abusive, harsh, punishing. They were mean and awful to the people playing prisoners. Sometimes they even lied about this. The guards really seemed to enjoy their role, and they seemed disappointed when the study ended after only 6 days. Right, not 2 weeks, 6 days. It got so out of hand, they had to stop everything. Well, the conclusion of all this Stanford prison study. There's Philip Zimbardo on the left. Okay. The critics, there's always critics and naysayers. They said, well, the participants knew these roles from the media. They were just acting like it was a movie or something. And the researchers said, ta-da, that's the point. People's behavior depends in part on the roles that they are in. And with these roles and the rules that go with the roles, the situation outweighs the personality once again. Do you think all those people that were the guards that were mean to the prisoners? Do you think those were really, nasty, awful, ugly, mean people? No, I don't think so either. But the situation where they were given that power turned them into what they thought a prison guard would be like. In both of these studies, behavior depends on the assigned roles. My question to you is, who is assigning your roles? Are you obedient to those roles? It seems to me that, for my generation, and I think for generations that have followed, being teens and 20s is the time in our life when we are the most likely to just flip off the person making the rules and say, I'll do it my way. And we usually come back to doing it the way they told us to do it in the first place. But at least we had that little spark of freedom to go out there and make our own mistakes. Really, ask yourself, how obedient are you to the role? Your role as a student says you should spend a whole lot of time every week studying. It's not a written rule. It's not a written role, but that's your job right now. Your job right now is to do as well in school and learn as much as you can to take with you for the rest of your life. I don't know how obedient we are to that. So let's look for some factors of obedience. When you're obedient, when you would rather not. First of all is legitimization of authority. What happens when we give up our own personal authority, our own personal right to say yes or no, and we say, okay, you're the boss, I'll follow the leader, is that we are absolved from responsibility. Not my fault. My boss said to do that. My parents told me to do that. My teacher told me to do that. I'm just following directions. And this is pretty much what the Germans said, after World War II and the Nazis. I was just following orders. So when we say, okay, you take authority, you make the decisions, that lets us off the hook for our own decisions. Then there's something called routinization. Isn't that a ridiculous word? It's when something becomes normalized. Let's say you have a job where your job is to sell a product that you know is just going to fall apart. It's cheap, it's shoddy, it's not made right. The manufacturers don't do anything about the warranty. It's something that shouldn't even be on the market, and your boss says, well, we got a big shipment of these in, and I want you to sell these, 40 this week or else. Well, after a while, at first you're like, I don't want to sell this to people. This thing is crap. But after a while, you get so used to doing it that it doesn't even bother you anymore. You just do it because, well, that's what the boss said. This is what I got to do. Yeah. I'll go through my spiel and I'll do it. It becomes normalized or routine. Third thing, C here on your slide, is wanting to be polite, wanting to not rock the boat. We really lack a language of dissent. So many times if we feel cornered about something, we just pop up and we get all angry. In the last 10 years, we're just teaching our children to say no to strangers who try to perpetrate actions on the child that the child shouldn't tolerate. When I was growing up, that long ago, in fact, my kids as well, if a grown-up told you to do something, you did it. If you didn't, you were in trouble. If Mrs. Biddick down the street said, get out of my yard, don't pick my flowers, and you continued to do it, all she had to do was call your mother, and you were in deep doo-doo. So you minded every adult that told you to do something. And adults had a tendency to believe adults and not children. That's how we've had all of these situations where children have been sexually molested, where all kinds of things going on because children were taught to obey adults and that adults would not believe them if another adult said it wasn't the case. It's come up to today to wanting to be polite. I've been in a restaurant, and you have too, and what you were served was not your expectation. It was worse. Maybe it was cold, maybe it was undercooked, maybe it was just awful. And the server comes by, and if the server stops and says, how's your meal? Many people will say, oh, it's fine. I'm just not very hungry. Well, you're not eating it because it's inedible or you don't like it or it's not the way you expected it to be. But most of us won't speak up and go, I'm sorry, this doesn't meet my expectation and I would like it taken back to the kitchen and just please take it off of my bill. We're really uncomfortable with that. We want to be polite. And D on this page, entrapment. This is a good sales technique. Entrapment happens all the time. We're going to look at it in several different ways. If I come up to you and I say, I'm helping to write a legal bill that makes animal cruelty illegal and a punishment for the person who's mean to the animals, would you sign my petition? Most of you are going to go, sure, I don't want animals mistreated. That's terrible. So you sign the petition, you give me your name and address and all of that stuff on the form. You're going to get emails forevermore. And then I pull out my little tin can and I say, well, could you just give any small amount of money to help take care of the animals that we shelter? Well, now what are you going to do? You've already said, I don't want the animals hurt. You've already signed the petition. You've already go, that's right, those people should have to pay a penalty. They should go to jail for that. Now all they're asking for is a couple of bucks or your change. You are entrapped. Unless you don't have any money on you, you're going to reach in your pocket and put something in the tin. You've committed to a cause, taking care of animals, and now it's escalated. And this happens time and time and time again in our lives. It's this almost a case of reciprocal commitment. I'm going to take care of the animals, says the person with the paperwork, and you are going to take care of the animals by giving your money. So we have what we call social influences on the way we think. Social influences can come in the way we cognitively think. It's concerned with the influences on our memory and our perception and what we choose to remember and how we remember. Many times we try to remember the good things. We try to remember the things that other people would be interested in. We try not to think about the negative. So we think about the positive positive instead. And one of the things that comes along with this influence in our beliefs are attributions. People are motivated to explain something by attribution. In other words, assigning a cause to it. You made a great grade on your last test because you studied really hard. I am attributing to you the characteristic of studying really hard. But there's a couple of kinds of attributions: situational and dispositional. Situational means something happened outside of yourself that influenced you to do what you do. Perhaps your grandparents were visiting and you wanted to show off for your grandparents that you got a really good grade on the test. So something in the environment out there, grandparents coming in, influenced you. Disposition is the cause of whatever happened is inside of you. It's a characteristic of you. It's not something that just happened to someone else. These situational and dispositional attributions, I can't say it either. So, situational attribution, identify the cause of an action as something in the environment. So, if I'm thinking about myself, I say, I failed the exam because the teacher hates me. That would be situational. The situation is the teacher hates me. A dispositional attribution over a failed test is identifying the cause as something inside of the person, a characteristic, a trait, or a motive. She failed the exam because she's lazy and didn't study. Do you see the difference there? When I failed, it's because the teacher hates me, and when you fail, you're lazy. This is something called a fundamental attribution error. This is when we look at other people's behavior. We have a tendency to overestimate the personal factors. In other words, why it happened is their fault, and to underestimate the influence of the situation in which they find themselves. And this is when we look at someone else's behavior. We'll look at when we're looking at our own behavior after we finish this first side of the coin. So fundamental attribution error. When we do this and we're talking about someone else's behavior, let's say we see someone walking across the sidewalk and they fall, and their books go everywhere, and their coat goes everywhere, and their go everywhere, and we go, oh my gosh, what a klutz. Wouldn't you know not to carry all those books and your drink and your coat on your arm and everything else? Of course you're going to fall down and spill everything. It's because they're clumsy, they're not paying attention, they didn't do what they should do. That would be the fundamental attribution error. We're blaming them. It's their character that caused the accident. Now, if we are walking across campus and we fall down and go splat and our books and cokes and everything else are strewn out on the ground, it's because of a hole in the ground. It's because the sidewalk was uneven. It's because there was a crack in the sidewalk and we caught our shoe in it. It's not the fact that we are clumsy or too lazy to make 2 trips or any of those things. It's something out there in the environment that caused us to have the bad reaction. So let's look at the other side of this coin, the self-serving bias. This is when we are explaining our own behavior. We take credit for good actions, and if we do something bad, we use the situational cause for the bad actions. I do good things, but society may cause me to do bad things. I got an A on the test because I studied hard. But this would be the other way around from the other side. The situation caused bad actions. I failed the test because, well, the teacher hates me. It's not that I'm lazy and didn't study. So it's a flip side. We turn it around one way for them and turn it around the other way for us. If you're having trouble getting a hold of this concept, if I haven't made it clear for you, please go look in your book or email me and we'll see what we can do about it. Well, going along with this is something called the just world hypothesis. The just world hypothesis says the world is fair and good people are rewarded and bad people are punished. That's nice, isn't it? It kind of goes along with that situation we had a while ago of the fundamental attribution error. So this leads to something called blaming the victim. And let me paint a picture for you. Let's say you turn on the news this evening and there's a news article about a house fire down in the city. okay? One of those old big houses downtown. And the house burned down, and 3 of the 5 kids died. The mom got out, but the grandma who lived there too, she died too. What was the cause of the fire? Well, the kids were playing with matches and candles, and they think the curtains caught on fire, and poof, everything went up, and people died. Well, I can hear people now. What was that mother thinking? Why wasn't she paying attention to what those children were doing? Where was the grandmother? Was she supposed to be looking out after them? We just blame. It's their fault. The house burned down and the children and Granny died. Well, no, it's not. I wish I could see the hands. If I said to you, how many of you played with matches as a kid when you weren't supposed to and your parents weren't looking, how many of you did that? Hands are going to go up. My own son nearly burned our house down. I said, come on, James, we're going to the store. He was, 11, 12 years old maybe. He was downstairs doing his own little experiment, right? He had fire. So he didn't want to get caught with it, so he throws it over in the trash barrel. Well, about 2 blocks away from home, I realized that I've walked out without my wallet. So I turn around and go back home to get my wallet. And what do I see? Smoke coming out of my garage. Not a happy sign. So he had set the trash on fire, which was near cardboard boxes, which was near flammable chemicals. I could have lost my whole house just because my kid was playing with matches. So when we hear these situations, we don't go, oh gosh, maybe I should send some money to help them, or maybe I should send some clothes. I think they lost all of their belongings, or I wonder if they have a place to stay. Do they have friends or family in the area? No. We're too busy pointing the finger at them, and we would never let it happen. This is good things happen to good people, and since something bad happened to them, they must be bad or at fault. It's terrible. This kind of thinking is so prevalent in our society, and what it does is it erases our humanity. It just keeps us from having that heart for other people and taking care of other people. Truth of the matter is, most things that happen in this life are both the situation we're in and the personality we have. And many times the situation is more powerful than the personality we have. Well, if all of this wasn't confusing enough, let's look at attitudes, and that's on your slide 13. Attitudes. By definition, attitudes are, here it is, relatively stable opinions containing a cognitive element and an emotional element. Okay, cognitive means I think something, and emotional means I feel something. And the truth of the matter is, many times what we think and what we feel don't go in the same direction. I've got a little example here. I think I should help my neighbor bring in her groceries, or his groceries. They're old and feeble, and they've got these sacks of groceries. And the other side of me says, I feel like it's not really my job to take care of him. Doesn't he have nieces or nephews or children that could come and help him? Why should I haul his groceries into the house? So I feel one way, I think another way. When do we step out of our own self in order to take care of other people, to be altruistic? When do we put aside our own personal comforts to help someone else? It depends, I think, on when we really see a need and how we've been conditioned throughout our life. One of the things that creates our attitudes is our generational identity. They have learned that the social and environmental influences that you experience during the time you're between the ages of 16 and 24 will create in you a generational attitude. That there will be characteristics to people of your generation that they can see. It's almost like a stereotype that's going to identify who you are. If we think back to people that were 16 to 24 in the 1940s during World War II, those people were incredibly patriotic. They saluted the flag. They put their arm over their hand over their heart when they said the Pledge of Allegiance. It was so hard for them when they were older adults to see the hippie generation in the late 60s and 70s sew pieces of flag onto their blue jeans or make a bag out of a flag or burn the flag. Oh my God, you would have thought they were setting fire to the White House. These people had such a fit about the flag. They were super patriotic. In the 50s, you had people that now they were out of the war. And in the 50s, it was like watching an old episode of Leave It to Beaver. Everybody wanted the picket house. Everybody wanted their own home. Everybody wanted a car in the driveway. Mom could now stay home. She didn't have to go to the factory and make airplanes anymore. The 40s were over. Dad could put on his suit and tie, and it was just Leave It to Beaver. It was so interesting. People could go to college now. They could get white-collar jobs. So the 60s came along. So here you have these people that were patriotic. Here you have these people that were about success and getting ahead and having things. And along come the hippies, the civil rights movement, morals changing. Oh my God. These older people thought the world was coming to an end. I mean, people would get fired for guys, you couldn't have long hair. Ladies, you weren't supposed to have skirts that were too short. All of these little rules and regulations of society, it was just wow. Kids got kicked out of school for having hair over their shirt collar. You wouldn't have dared to have worn a T-shirt with a slogan on it that was not respectful. Boy, they really did. If you read the accounts, they really did think the world was pretty much coming to an end. So if you have this 16 to 24 age bracket, that's where most of you are right now. Do you think this pandemic that we're experiencing right now will influence how you think as an adult? Will it affect how you vote? Will it affect how you think about science? Will it affect how you think about other cultures? Interesting, because this could really get very personal for a whole lot of people. The digital age, you guys don't remember not having cell phones. You don't remember when there was only black and white TV. You certainly don't remember when there was no TV. When I was a little girl and I would go to live in the summers at my grandmother's house on a farm out in the country, we had an outhouse. We did not have indoor running water. If you needed to go to the bathroom, you trekked across the yard, past the chicken coop, and went out back to the outhouse. Honest to God, in my lifetime, it was out in the country, okay? I will admit that. But it's so weird to me that I lived in that time. We did have a refrigerator, an electric refrigerator, but when I was teeny tiny, I can remember my grandmother having an ice box. My granddad would bring home a great big block of ice. He would put it in the ice box, and the cold from that block of ice would keep the milk and eggs cool. Yeah, in my lifetime. And I really am not older than, dirt or something. So generational identity. Gosh, I think the hippie years kind of influenced me to be questioning authority, a little bit do it my way or the highway. I'd have to stop and think about that, I guess. Maybe I don't want to share that as much as I think I would. So with all of this, we said that this chapter had to do with how society create in us behaviors that would not occur if we were left to ourselves. And one of the ways we do this is friendly persuasion. Now, we're going to talk about coercive persuasion too, but friendly persuasion. How do we influence people to do what we want them to do? You are constantly bombarded with ad agency messages. Buy this, buy that. Vote this way, don't vote that way. So now when you see the short one, you fill in the blanks. So it's repetition of information, and this is called the validity effect. Let's say someone's running for political office. Maybe they're running for the school board. Nothing big and federal, the school board. And this candidate has a slogan, all of their signs, that says, the education candidate, the education candidate. Here for the young people, here for the young people. Well, maybe if you go back and you look at what they've stood for in the past, or maybe they had some kind of a city councilman role or something, an elected position, and you see that everything they voted for, they voted against the best interest of the school district. But they have this campaign that says, for the students, the education candidate. We've heard it so many times, we believe it, we think it's valid without going back and checking the data to see if it's the truth. And B, an argument from an attractive person is more persuasive than an argument from an unattractive person. I don't know that Abraham Lincoln would have ever gotten elected president if we had television back then. He was depressed, emaciated, tired, bony-looking man. He was not an attractive man, but he was an eloquent man. And so people read his speeches and read his thoughts. They didn't really have to look at him so much. But we've already talked about the car show and the tall, skinny girl in the sequins, and that they don't have me, Nani, to show off the new cars. We do like attractive people. So pairing the message with something pleasant. If you go to a car dealership, they're going to offer you coffee and donuts. They're going to have snacks for the kids, maybe, or snacks for you. If your mother ever had one of those Tupperware parties or Christmas toy parties or any of that thing where she invited her friends and they all came and sat around while somebody they knew, pitched whatever it was they were selling, there's always dessert. There's always something cool, not Kool-Aid, but lemonade or iced tea or something. I had a candlelight party for my niece one time, and I did it in my beautiful backyard with all my flowers and my goldfish ponds and the water fountain and everything, and I had really cozy chairs and pillows and blankets, and I served wine to everyone and really good hors d'oeuvres because I was trying to help my niece get her business off the ground. Sure enough, she had the biggest show she ever had. So we paired something really pleasant with the message, candlelight and wine and food. Sometimes, though, fear is used. People will resist something that is in their own best interest if they have become fearful. What is it that people are afraid of? I'm almost afraid of uneducated, okay? Some people, though, will say, I don't have kids in school. Why should I vote to raise school taxes? Well, the reason you raise school taxes is so that there are plenty of books and computers and teachers getting a decent and fair pay so that the next generation isn't living back in the Middle Ages. That's why we pay taxes. But even though it's in people's best interest to have an educated population, they will still go away from doing the right thing because I don't know exactly what they fear. Maybe they fear running out of money. Maybe they just don't want to do it. Information that produces anxiety and then tells you how to get away from the anxiety. I always think of insurance salesmen, and I used to teach sales tactics, so I know how to do this stuff. In the old days, if you had a baby or you bought a house or anything else that might appear on the public record, suddenly you had a million insurance people sending you offers to come out to your house and talk to you about insurance. And it just so happened that we went to church, and our organist at our church was an insurance salesman. Honest to goodness, this happened. He came to our house. We had our first baby. We were poor as church mice. And he had his binder out there with all of his, benefits and characteristics of the policies and all of this stuff. And we said, yeah, it sounds good, but we just don't have the money to buy insurance right now. My husband had a little bit of life insurance at work, but maybe a little bit of health insurance, but not very much. Let's face it, if he got run over by a truck, I'd be living back with my mother, and I wouldn't want to do that. So he paints this picture. It's like, okay, kids, I understand. He starts to put everything away, and he says, big sigh, and we're like, what? And he goes, oh, it just reminds me so much of, I don't know what their names are. We'll call them Jim and Sally. Jim and Sally were a lot like you guys. They'd been married a little bit longer, and they had a couple of kids. And Jim was on his way to work one day, and a truck lost control on the ice and came across the median and killed him dead as a doornail on his way to work. And there was Sally with two little kids. They were about 3 and 5 when Jim died. And she was responsible for them financially and emotionally in every way possible. And they couldn't afford this insurance either. Just sure hope that nothing like that happens to you guys. Well, shoot, we're like grabbing the contract out of his hand to buy that life insurance because we can just see ourselves with my husband dead and me trying to raise the baby, right? That stuff happens. They do. Look at the people online right now that are coming up with some kind of cure or prayer cloth or magic to keep you from getting the flu. Just send $50 to me and I'll send you my special doodah stuff to keep you healthy. Makes me mad just to think about it. Well, then there's something called coercive persuasion, and that's on slide 15. All right, we think of this as brainwashing. We think of it as how you get hooked into a cult. But quite honestly, you could apply this to military recruiters, church people trying to get you to come, fraternities and sororities, clubs that are trying to build their membership. And there's some things that people use. But, cults use this too. But so do the good things. All right? First of all, they may cause you physical or emotional distress. And I think for this one, I'm going to use the military recruiter. Military recruiters used to hang around the mall when there were arcades at the mall before we all had our own video games at home. And so they would, hang out, give away free stuff and all, and they would talk to the young people that were at the mall in the middle of the afternoon because it was real obvious they didn't have a lot of future where employment or school was happening. And they would paint for them a picture of, well, how are you going to get an education? Well, what is it you want to do in life? How are you ever going to get to do that without an education? Do your parents have money? Do you have money? Oh, they would paint this emotionally distressing picture of you being basically a financial loser the rest of your life. Well, the problem was set out in simple terms. Without an education, without a chance to get ahead, you're never going to get ahead. And the simple answer is enlist. We have the GI Bill. We will pay for your education. Woo! Simple problem, simple answer. You don't have anything? We'll give it to you. Sign here, press hard. Third copy's yours. And they just keep it up. They ask you a lot of questions at first, and then they turn it around on you. Now, leader offers unconditional love, acceptance, attention, whatever. I don't think your CO in the military is going to love you, but they will pay you a lot of attention. Let's take church as an example, because I grew up in a very, 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 very conservative church. So I know that of which I'm speaking. And of course, their simple problem is you're a sinner going to hell. And the simple answer is repent, accept Jesus, and come to church. All right? So in that situation, we're going to have lots of love, lots of acceptance. Everybody's going to be so glad to see you come to church and make a profession of faith. Ooh, look, you're going to get baptized. And I'm not making fun of this, okay? I have done all those things. I am all of those things. But it is played up a lot because people have a psychological need to be accepted. And this is the ultimate in acceptance. D, the new identity based on the group. Well, okay, you are going to get a uniform in the military, and it is sharp. It's not like your old baggy t-shirt and jeans that you live in. It's not a hoodie that you pull over your head on a bad hair day. This is the real deal. You are looking sharp, and you have a rank, and you have a number. And if you do the acceptable good things, you get promoted out of your rank. And with that uniform, and with that new bearing you have, and with those slash marks or pins or whatever the heck you get in the military, with that comes automatic respect from people. We do respect our soldiers that serve. I respect our soldiers that serve and have served and will serve. So you have this new identity based on the group. It happens the same way in church, or my church it did. But let's see, you were saved, you were born again, you were a child of God. We even called the women sister and the men brother. It was like you were in the club now. You were in the club. You were better than the people that weren't in the club. E, entrapment. We talked about that just a little bit a while ago. Once you say yes to something, once you give people the idea that you might have a need, they are going to pull you in. You tell that recruiter, nah, I don't have the money to go to college. My parents don't have the money for me to go to college. I just need to try to figure out how to get promoted down at the Walmart. There you go. And so they say, well, would you like to have a better education? Oh, yes. If you could go to school for free, would you? Oh, yes. And once you've said that, oh, yes, I would go to school if it was free, they gotcha. Okay, because they're going to offer you free education, which is how many people I know have gotten their education. But it is a form of entrapment. The same way with the church. Once you sign up to go to church, they're going to want you to volunteer for every committee there is. They want you to teach Sunday school, and they want you to sing in the choir, and they want you to go on visitation with somebody that's more experienced in going on visitation. I mean, it could keep you busy 24/7. And it's so hard to say no. Information severely controlled. That's F here on this slide 15. In the military, you go to boot camp, and you don't get to play on your phone, and you don't get to play on your iPad, and you don't have access to TV. You are up at dawn, and you are so exhausted by the end of the day, you just fall into bed. Maybe you get to call home on the weekend, maybe not, depending on what's going on, but your personal activities, your news source, your information for home, all of that is curtailed because they are taking you from the guy or gal who doesn't have any direction, and they are turning you into soldiers. And believe me, that is 6 weeks, and you come home and even your parents hardly recognize you. You are so different. They have controlled you and the information that you get. Well, I've been using church as the other side of this. When my daughter was about 14, we'll say, she went to Youth for Christ camp. I don't know if Youth for Christ, YFC, still exists or not, but they used to have a camp. And my daughter Kim and her friend Diane, they went to camp for a week to YFC. I didn't see anything wrong with it. You know, we were Methodists. It was okay with me if they went. So I didn't realize how conservative they were. So when they come home, Kim's like, yeah, we had a good time, and we got to swim, we got to do this, we had Bible study every day. It was okay. Well, Diane goes home, and she gathers up all of her teen magazines and all of her music. I think maybe she even threw makeup in there. I'm not sure. And she had this huge bonfire in her backyard because she had heard the part of the message that all of this was sinful. My daughter didn't get that message. My daughter's response was, well, if she was going to burn all that stuff up, Mom, why didn't she just give it to me? Which I thought was particularly humorous at the time because my daughter was not going to listen to those kinds of messages. I won't judge them. What we hear, what we take away from things. Diane, she didn't listen to rock and roll anymore. She didn't listen to rock and roll on the radio anymore. She only listened to the gospel station now. She didn't buy any popular music. She bought religious music. And I think to this day, I ran into her a few years ago. She seemed to me to be a pretty straight arrow. So you see, in all of this, attitudes can affect our behavior, and our behavior can affect our attitudes. We do have a tendency to rationalize the actions we take so that they're acceptable to the attitudes that we hold. It's very difficult to believe one thing and do something else. It sets up for us something called cognitive dissonance, and it's really uncomfortable to live with that. Okay, we're going to call this done for today. Email me if you have any questions, if I need to clarify something for you, and I will see you next time. All right? Well, I won't see you, but I'll be talking to you next time. Bye now.